Brandon stood there with a bag of groceries clutched awkwardly in one hand, and the receipt he hadn't asked for fluttering in the other, like it had a message only he wasn't meant to read. His jaw tightened, not because of the insult that had just rolled off the cashier's tongue like it had been rehearsed, but because of what happened right after. You saw it, didn't you? You heard it too. You were standing just close enough in line to catch the moment the air changed, just enough to feel that impossible chill settle across your spine like a warning. Not everyone noticed it. The woman behind you was still on her phone, scrolling through a reel of golden retrievers in Halloween costumes. The man with the worn veteran's cap 3 people back didn't blink. But you saw the cashier's face. You saw what happened when Brandon looked up and said nothing in response. She went pale, not embarrassed, not ashamed, terrified. This isn't the kind of story that starts with violence or chaos. It starts with a question that no one dares to ask in daylight. What if someone in plain sight knows everything about you, things you've never spoken, things you've forgotten, things even you never understood, and they're watching not with malice, but with fear? That's the kind of fear that was written across Emily's face. Emily, the cashier, mid-20s, long black hair pinned in a messy bun, wearing a name tag with a flower doodled in the corner. She had greeted every customer before him with a half smile in the same autopilot tone. "Hi, did you find everything okay?" But when Brandon stepped up, she didn't speak. Not until the transaction ended. Not until he turned to leave, and then, unprovoked, she laughed, loud enough for the other cashier to glance over. And then she said it. A quick, bitter jab like she'd been waiting to say it for years. "Some people really don't belong here." That was it. But it wasn't what she said. It was how she said it. Like it wasn't meant for Brandon, like it wasn't even meant for anyone in this time. Brandon paused, barely turned. And you, right there, within earshot, saw his eyes. Not surprised, not angry, just still. And then he asked her something you couldn't quite make out. Just a whisper, maybe even just one word. A name, a place. Whatever it was, it made her drop the handheld scanner like it burned her fingers. You remember that sound, don't you? That hard plastic cracking on tile. You remember the look in her eyes, how they flicked to the security camera in the corner, how she tried to say something but her throat had locked up like a machine glitching mid-function. And here's where reality stopped behaving. 1 minute, Brandon was there with his back half-turned, receipt in hand. And then, he wasn't. Not walked away. Not ran. Just gone. Like you blinked and your brain filled in something that wasn't real, but you know what you saw. The other cashier noticed it too, but he played it off. Pretended like Brandon had walked out the automatic doors. Even buzzed someone on the earpiece, claimed there was an issue with aisle 4, but aisle 4 was empty, and the security feed, blank screen, not glitchy, not corrupted, just not there. Like those few seconds had been deliberately erased, not by malfunction but by design. Later that night, you couldn't sleep. Your phone buzzed once, an unknown number, no message, no caller ID, just a name, right there in the preview bar. One word, the same one you think Brandon whispered. The one you thought you hadn't heard. Now ask yourself, why do you remember this so clearly when no one else seems to? Why did you see his eyes? Why did you hear the sound of that scanner falling when the others didn't even flinch? And what if this wasn't the first time Brandon disappeared in plain sight? What if the truth isn't about who insulted him, but why she did? Because Emily didn't insult a stranger. She warned someone she was never supposed to recognize, and tomorrow, when the store opens again, you might want to go back. Not because you need answers, but because Emily didn't show up for her next shift. And her locker? It was found open, with one item inside. Your name, written in ink that wasn't dry. The name on that locker, still wet with ink like it had just been written moments ago, clawed at the edges of your mind, refusing to let go. It was your name. But not just as a word, more like a warning etched in a language your brain wanted to forget. The locker itself was in a back room no customers ever saw, hidden behind rows of cold storage boxes. Whoever had left it there had known you might come looking. Or maybe wanted you to. You stood there in the eerie fluorescent hum, heart hammering with a growing sense of dread that stretched beyond logic or reason. But was it even real? The seconds before Brandon vanished felt like a dream now, something slipping through your fingers every time you blinked. The sound of that scanner hitting the tile? Had it even made noise? Because the video feed, the one you had begged the night manager to pull up, was as clean as a hospital sheet. No crash, no fall, no pale-faced cashier frozen in terror. Just a cashier scanning groceries like any other Tuesday. The truth behind what no one tells you is that your memory had begun to fray before you even noticed. At home, you replayed every detail, except the ones that mattered. The whisper, the sudden absence, the name on the locker. They teased the edges of your mind, stubbornly refusing to fit together. Worse, your phone started acting strangely. Calls dropped without explanation. A soft static seemed to grow louder when you focused too hard on the name. And sometimes, just when you thought you had a grip on what was real, a faint audio glitch would bleed through, an almost imperceptible voice layered under your voicemail greetings saying, "Remember." But remember what? And who had recorded it? More importantly, why? That's when Eli came into your life. Eli, with his smoky voice and unreadable eyes, showed up claiming to be a private investigator specializing in real unsolved mysteries, the kind buried in the cracks of ordinary life. He said he'd heard about the cashier's disappearance and Brandon's vanishing act. Stories too strange even for the police to touch. At first, his presence was a relief. Someone else questioning the same impossible things. Someone else trying to unravel the knots that bound your thoughts. But Eli's help felt slippery. Sometimes he contradicted himself, forgot names, gave conflicting timelines, and once even insisted that Brandon had never worked at that store. His stories sometimes felt rehearsed, like fragments of a script he'd read too often. Late one night, Eli handed you a file, pages of grainy black and white photos, surveillance stills that looked like a bad dream, blurry figures bending and twisting where they shouldn't be. "They don't want you to remember this," he murmured. "This isn't just about a missing person or a cashier's breakdown. It's bigger, much bigger." But when you asked him for more, his eyes would dart away, voice dropping to a whisper. "Some things you're not ready to see. Your sleep unraveled, nights folded into restless hours, filled with fleeting images of faces you didn't recognize and voices calling out names you'd never heard. Your own reflection began to feel alien. Was that really you staring back, or someone else trying to reach through the glass? You found yourself retracing steps that led nowhere, conversations you couldn't remember starting, and items in your apartment moved as if by unseen hands. The line between mental breakdown and something far darker began to blur. Each time you thought you'd found a clue, it slipped through your fingers like smoke. Then came the hidden recordings, files found on your own phone, labeled with dates you had no memory of. When played, they whispered fragmented confessions, half-remembered conversations, and a voice you swore was yours repeating the name from the locker again and again, over and over, as if trying to convince itself it was true. But the deeper you delved, the more you questioned everything. Was this a confession or a warning? A truth or a lie planted deep inside your mind? Eli warned you not to trust your senses, not to believe what felt familiar. But what else could you do when even your memories started fading? When the people you counted on began to disappear from your life without explanation, leaving only the faintest echoes behind? You're left holding pieces of a puzzle that don't fit, chasing shadows through a labyrinth designed to trap you, inside your own fear. And as the days stretch longer, you realize the most terrifying part might be this. You're not sure anymore if you're the one being hunted, or if you're the one doing the hunting. Because some truths only surface when everything else has been erased. And what they don't want you to remember is the line where reality ends and something else begins. The question isn't whether Brandon vanished, but what you've become. In the silence he left behind, there was a moment, a brief flickering moment when the world seemed to shift back into focus, as if the mist of confusion had lifted just enough for you to glimpse the shape of the truth. It was the kind of clarity that hits like a punch, leaving you breathless but certain, the kind that promises answers after the long nights of doubt. You remember the night you sat alone in that cramped motel room, the thin walls echoing with the hum of the city outside when the pieces finally aligned. The file Eli had given you, the scattered photographs, the cryptic recordings, the fragments of conversations that felt torn from a fractured mind, suddenly stitched together with an unsettling precision. The mystery that had haunted you, the vanishing cashier, the whisper that shattered reality, the name written on the locker, all pointed towards something horrific buried decades ago beneath the veneer of everyday normalcy. It was a secret hidden in plain sight, a thread woven through generations that you had stumbled upon by accident, or perhaps by design. You found it in an old news article, tucked away in the dusty archives of the local library, yellowed and brittle, but unmistakably real. The story was about a woman named Grace Morgan, a cashier from a small town not far from where Emily had disappeared, who vanished under eerily similar circumstances 40 years earlier. The details were sparse, buried, under years of forgotten headlines and faded photographs, but the echoes were undeniable. Grace had also spoken a name in her last moments, a name no one else had heard. She too had left behind a cryptic message that no one could decode. The community had swept her disappearance under the rug, labeling it a tragic mystery, never to be disturbed again. The parallels were so precise, so unnerving, that you couldn't ignore the feeling that history was repeating itself, with you caught in the middle. That night, armed with this knowledge, you believed you had cracked the code. You thought you understood the pattern, the hidden truth behind the disappearances, the audio glitches, the whispered names. You convinced yourself that you were on the verge of exposing something real, something that those in power had desperately tried to bury. You felt a cautious relief, a fragile hope that the nightmare was finally unraveling, that the pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fit together. You even called Eli, breathless and eager, ready to share your breakthrough, ready to feel less alone in the darkness. But the relief was short-lived, because just as you settled into that moment of clarity, a single detail slipped through your fingers and shattered everything. The name Grace Morgan whispered in the old article wasn't the one you'd heard Emily utter, nor the one you saw written on the locker in fresh ink. It was different, subtly, terrifyingly different, and in that difference lay a rift deep enough to swallow every certainty you'd built. The whispered name was a mirror, a reflection twisted just enough to distort the reality you clung to, a cruel reminder that the truth was far more elusive, far more dangerous than you'd dared imagine. That night, as you lay awake wrestling with this new, fractured reality, fragments of your own past began to surface, memories you hadn't known, you'd lost. A childhood afternoon spent in the sun-dappled backyard of your grandmother's house, the scent of old wood and earth heavy in the air, the laughter of voices that didn't belong to anyone you recognized. A strange incident at a family gathering, where someone's face went pale at the mention of a forgotten name, a hush falling over the room, like a shadow creeping through the light. You realized with a sickening certainty that the roots of this mystery stretched back into your own life, tangled in memories too painful or too carefully suppressed to acknowledge. The trauma you thought was unique, a personal scar, was part of a larger, older pattern, an echo of something darker that had been watching, waiting, feeding on fear and forgotten truths since long before you were born. But this watcher, this force that seemed to move just beyond the edges of sight, was no mere ghost or figment of your unraveling mind. It was something more insidious, a presence that didn't announce itself with screams or shadows, but crept into the spaces between your thoughts, the quiet moments when you were most vulnerable. It twisted your perception, planted doubts, erased memories like a thief in the night, making you question not only what was real, but who you were at your core. It was a silence that screamed, a cold breath on the back of your neck, a reflection in the mirror that didn't quite match your movements. And it had been here, watching from the beginning. The most unsettling part was how it seemed to know you, how it learned your fears, your weaknesses, your secrets, turning them against you with surgical precision. You tried to push back, to reclaim your sanity, but every attempt felt like a step deeper into its web. The line between your own mind and the creeping influence blurred until you could no longer tell if you were losing your grip or if the world itself was warping around you. And then, just when you thought you had no choice but to surrender to the madness, you found it, the one detail that changed everything. A recording hidden in the depths of your phone, one you were sure hadn't been there before. You played it back, heart pounding, and listened as the voice, your own, repeated the whispered name once more. Only this time the words twisted, distorted, overlapping with another voice, a voice that was not yours but carried a weight of authority, cold and absolute. The message was clear and chilling. This is not your story. This is not your past. You have been watching, but you are not the witness you believe yourself to be. The screen flickered. The room seemed to darken, and with that, the entire narrative you'd held on to dissolved into chaos. Every scene, every conversation, every fleeting shadow of truth up to this moment needed to be reconsidered, replayed, re-examined under a new, darker light. The very foundations of your reality fractured, and you understood that you were being drawn into something far beyond a missing person or a haunted memory. Something that had been waiting patiently, unseen, but omnipresent, to pull you into a story far more tangled and terrifying than you had ever imagined. You're not crazy. They lied to you. The mystery you thought you uncovered was just the beginning of another layer, and this time it was personal. Now, go back, watch again, listen closer, because the truth is hiding in what you missed, and what you never saw is about to surface. You weren't alone in this. Never alone. As the days blurred into restless nights, the creeping suspicion that this tangled nightmare wasn't confined to you alone gnawed relentlessly at your mind. It wasn't just the fragmented memories or the whispered names that haunted the silence. It was the subtle signs, the strange coincidences, the moments when the world seemed to fold inward and reveal hidden layers beneath its surface. Across the country, others like you were feeling the pull. Those quiet watchers, the ones who had slipped through the cracks of ordinary life, clutching at threads of a shared secret too dangerous to speak aloud. They didn't know each other, not directly, but they communicated through shadows, cryptic messages sent through anonymous forums, obscure symbols etched into public places, shared dreams that echoed across time zones like ghosts whispering through a forgotten language. It was in these fragmented connections that the first true evidence of a vast, unseen network began to surface. A conspiracy written in silence and coded signals. Messages hidden in the static of late-night broadcasts, coordinates slipped into the metadata of viral videos, and images so innocuous on the surface that only the keenest eyes could decode their meaning. They were warnings and invitations all, at once a language without words, designed to pull the initiated closer to a truth that defied logic, memory, even identity itself. And as you followed these breadcrumbs, you began to sense that the boundaries between observer and participant were dissolving. Like you, the audience wasn't just watching a story unfold. You were being woven into its fabric, becoming a living part of the enigma. What you saw, what you remembered, and what you thought you understood were fragile constructs, shifting shadows shaped by a force that manipulated perception with surgical precision. This force didn't just watch from afar, it controlled, shaped, erased. It was a puppeteer pulling on the strings of memory, identity, and control, blurring the line between what was real and what was planted in your mind as a deliberate, malicious lie. Questions that once felt simple now spun endlessly in your head. Who were you before the truth began to seep in? Whose memories were you carrying, and were they even your own? What parts of yourself were real, and which were puppets dancing? Through a tune written in silence, amid the growing dread, a third perspective emerged. A voice separate from the confusion, steady and unnervingly clear. This observer, an unseen chronicler who seemed detached from the chaos yet intimately entwined with it, surfaced through found footage dating back 20 years. Raw, grainy recordings the government never released, now leaked and circulating. In the darkest corners of the web, the footage showed a man, calm but haunted, speaking directly to the camera in a way that felt like a confession and a warning. His words hinted at a deeper layer beneath the mystery, one that had been silently watching, cataloging, and manipulating for decades. He spoke of the Watchers, entities that operated beyond the reach of law or logic, whose presence was felt more than seen, forces that knew your name, your fears, and your secrets before you even whispered them to yourself. He never named them, but the implication was clear. This was bigger than any missing person, bigger than lost memories or shadowy conspiracies. It was a systematic erasure of autonomy, a slow infiltration into the very essence of self, designed to fracture reality into unrecognizable shards and keep you suspended in perpetual uncertainty. The recordings ended abruptly, with a chilling statement that echoed long after the screen went dark. You were right all along, but the truth you seek is a door, and once it opens, it may never close again. With that, the network of Watchers, the hidden messages, and the fractured memories converged into a single terrifying realization. This story wasn't just a narrative to be observed. It was a living, breathing entity that consumed those who tried to grasp it. And now, you and those others were irrevocably entangled, bound by a shared secret that whispered through dreams and flickered in the shadows of everyday life. The line between the Watcher and the watched blurred further until it vanished completely, leaving you to wonder, who is really in control, and what does it mean to be free when the very fabric of your reality is a carefully woven lie? The story pulses beneath the surface, waiting for the next move. And the question that lingers, cold and unrelenting, is whether you will step through that door or be swallowed by the silence on the other side. The moment came like a fracture in the sky, silent, inevitable, and suffocating. It wasn't the mystery of what had happened that now gripped you, but the weight of why it had happened. A question so intimate, so raw, it pierced deeper than fear or confusion. Why had this fractured reality been forced upon you, and what did it mean about the fragile, unspoken essence of being human? Standing on the edge of everything you once believed, you felt the shattering clarity settle over your bones, a devastating paradox that the very truth you sought could either obliterate your sense of self or become the salvation you never imagined you needed. This was no longer about cryptic messages or the shifting shadows of memory. It was about the unbearable loneliness hidden in every human heart, the secret that beneath the masks of normalcy, we are all vulnerable to losing ourselves, to becoming ghosts in our own stories. And here you were, caught in the abyss where identity and reality blurred into one. The Watchers, the signals, the missing fragments of your past, they were not simply external forces but reflections of the human condition itself. Fragile, fractured, desperately grasping for meaning in a world that often refuses to offer answers. In this crucible of revelation, a confession emerged, not from some distant, unknowable source, but from within. A voice trembling with raw vulnerability spoke directly to you, confessing a truth that had been buried beneath layers of denial and fear. It admitted that the fractures in your memory, the vanishing people, the whispered names, all of it was intertwined with the pain of isolation and the desperate hope for connection. The Watchers were not just outside observers, but mirrors of your own deepest fears. Fear of forgetting who you are, fear of being erased, fear of never truly being seen. And the choice before you was no longer about solving the puzzle. It was about embracing the terrifying possibility that you might never fully escape the labyrinth of your own mind. This moment, fragile, charged and irrevocable, offered two paths. One promised destruction, the unraveling of your carefully constructed reality until nothing was left but a void of unanswerable questions and endless silence. The other whispered salvation, a fragile hope that by accepting the mystery, by surrendering control, you might find a strange kind of freedom, a release from the relentless need to understand, to remember, to be whole. But the choice was yours alone, and whatever path you chose, you knew there would be no turning back. As you stood there, suspended between fear and hope, the world around you seemed to pulse with a quiet intensity, as if the very air held its breath, waiting for your decision. The watchers faded into the background, their presence now felt as an echo inside your own heart, rather than a looming threat. You realized that the true mystery wasn't what had been done to you, but what you were willing to do, with what you had been given, the courage to face the darkness inside, and the strength to seek light in places others dared not look. And then, as if waking from a dream you never knew you were trapped in, the realization settled, a haunting awakening rather than an ending. The story was not a closed chapter but a living question, a mirror held up to your own fears and hopes. It invited you to look deeper, to listen harder, and to find meaning in the spaces between the shadows. The screen darkened slowly, leaving you with the echo of a single line, poetic, haunting, and impossible to forget. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for stories you were never meant to hear. Until next time, remember, some truths don't want to be found,